Good morning. My name is Justin Kennedy, and today I'll be presenting an argument from Peter Singer's text entitled Practical Ethics. In this presentation, I will analyze arguments presented from Chapter 7 of the text on passive euthanasia, and will argue that non-voluntary euthanasia would serve as a more ethical act than merely letting one suffer until a forthcoming death. To explain passive euthanasia to readers, Singer gives an example of an elderly, incompetent woman who has been diagnosed with pneumonia. The hospital makes a deal with the family to treat the next 3 infections, but will let nature take its course on the 4th infection. After being treated for pneumonia, the woman lives on but later dies from an untreated urinary tract infection, which can be believed to have caused excruciating pain, although it may not have been verbalized. In this instance, a doctor chose not to give life-saving care, which some view as worthy and necessary, and while others constitute as murder. Singer describes passive euthanasia as part of the acts and omission doctrine, where in acting one causes someone to die, or in omission one does not administer treatment that could save a life or treat pain, eventually allowing one to die. As we read the text, passive euthanasia as exhibited in the acts and omission doctrine is a rather popular practice, meaning that many incompetent and terminally ill patients who are met with potentially even more life-threatening conditions are not giving treatments that could lessen the amount of stress and pain felt by the individual, whether or not the pain or stress is verbalized. Instead, they are left to suffer and die. From here, I will argue that non-voluntary euthanasia, an act where euthanasia is administered to someone who is not or has not been able to give consent for their life to be ended or prolonged. While non-voluntary euthanasia may be controversial, it would serve as a more humane and ethical way to die, as it would allow for a more instantaneous and practically pain-free death. The problem that comes with this argument is that individuals who are unable to consent to treatment or lack thereof are killed, which Singer points out creates an ethical dilemma for many Westerners. To put an ease to that dilemma, Singer argues that non-voluntary euthanasia does not find fault from any of the 4 philosophical grounds dealing with the killing of humans. I will now summarize those arguments. There is the classical utilitarian argument that claims that killing self-aware humans would cause havoc and instigate worry amongst the living. There's also the preference utilitarian argument that claims that a human's desire to go on living is a reason against killing them. There's also the idea that in order to have a right to life, one must be able to desire an existence. And there's also the respect for autonomy, wherein one has a claim to his or her independence. The elderly woman in the aforementioned example did not have any awareness of her autonomy. She didn't have a right to life or an expressed desire to go on living, and it would seem that other self-aware humans would find it right to end this woman's suffering, and would find comfort knowing that someone would end their life for them if the conditions warranted. Yet, because non-voluntary euthanasia is not legal, and passive euthanasia, through the acts and omission doctrine, is, she lived and further suffered various infections before dying of a urinary tract infection. The fear that comes from legalizing non-voluntary euthanasia is that doctors will either be mistaken or they will misuse their power to end or prolong someone's life. However, as readers find in Singer's text, the states and countries that practice euthanasia have strict guidelines that must be followed. When these standards are followed, it can arguably be said that the positives coming from ending a terminally suffering adult or infant's life far outweigh any negative connotations that may come from the legalization of euthanasia with strict guidelines. In this presentation, I have showed how passive euthanasia through the acts and omissions process could be better substituted with the legalization of non-voluntary euthanasia in an effort to reduce human suffering by providing an instantaneous pain-free death. I reiterated Singer's argument that those who normally argue against the killing of an aware being cannot use their arguments when referring to an incompetent, suffering being with no autonomy, right to life, or desire for life to continue. Therefore, in conclusion, I argue that it would be in the best interest of those persons to be instantly and painlessly killed, rather than suffer from omission of medical treatment that is exhibited through passive euthanasia.